when we are left alone, without external noise, without distracting conversations and notifications, a strange silence arises. It's not just the absence of sounds. It's a space where the perception of time itself comes to life. We notice how seconds seem to elongate. The pause between thoughts becomes tangible. A drop of water in the sink, the creak of furniture, the wind outside. Suddenly, all these things gain weight. We begin to hear not only the outside world, but also ourselves. And it is here that time slows down, or rather, unfolds. In society, we live by the rhythms of others, meetings, messages, conversations. Our internal clocks sync with external signals, and when we are alone, this tempo breaks. We find ourselves alone with ourselves, and our subjective perception of time reorganizes. This phenomenon is not just a psychological effect. It reflects how the brain perceives changes. In solitude, without the constant influx of new experiences, each moment begins to feel broader. A simple act, like pouring tea, can take a few minutes of internal attention, because there is no rush, no observer. There is only you and the moment. Many note that in solitude, memories of events long forgotten resurface. This is not accidental. Memory begins to work differently. Without the overload of new information, the brain opens access to old layers, childhood, past days, lost love, and in such moments, the past feels closer than yesterday evening. But solitude is not always slowing down. It can also be acceleration, fear, anxiety, worry. They compress time. A person in dense solitude may feel that hours fly by in minutes, because the mind is restless, unable to anchor itself. Here, time loses its form, becomes fluid. Solitude is like a mirror in which time looks at itself, and everyone sees something different in it. Some find peace, others emptiness, but both are honest. In such moments, you can't pretend. The silence of solitude is ruthless and just. That's why philosophers throughout history valued solitude not as isolation, but as a return to oneself. Plato pointed out that knowledge begins with an internal dialogue, and for it to happen, you must step away from the crowd. Schopenhauer believed that the ability to be alone is a sign of spiritual strength, because only the strong can endure themselves. When we are alone, the mask disappears. We begin to hear how our own voice sounds, and in this sound, the shimmering of time. It is not linear, not mechanical. It is subjective, fluid, changeable. When you are alone, the noise disappears, the demands disappear, and with them, the familiar markers of time vanish. Thoughts don't rush. No one is hurrying you. You simply are, and that's the strangeness. You no longer observe time. You live it. You become part of it. Sometimes solitude feels like walking through a room where the clocks have stopped ticking. Seconds blur. Minutes turn into sensations. One day can seem like a week, and an hour, a moment. This is not due to boredom or anxiety. It's because you've stopped perceiving time as something external. It has become internal. In the crowd, we feel boundaries. Someone arrives, someone leaves. We compare, we react. We move along the rails laid by the collective consciousness. But in solitude, there are no rails. You are not the passenger. You are the road itself. And perhaps that's why solitude feels stretched. Not because we are lonely, but because we finally meet our true selves. And this self has no habit of looking at the clock. It's not in a hurry. It simply exists. Sometimes it feels like solitude opens a portal. The space is the same, but you enter a different dimension. One where there is no bustle, no goals. There is only presence. And this is difficult because it requires looking face to face with things that are easy to hide in the crowd. Fear, emptiness, uncertainty. But it is in this silence that the opportunity arises to ask, what is time? Maybe it's not a stream that carries us away, but a mirror we are afraid to look into. We are used to thinking of time as something linear. Morning, day, evening, Monday, Friday, Monday, again. But in solitude, this linearity cracks. A day may start at midnight and end in the middle of the day. A thought does not arrive on schedule. Mood does not obey the plan. Perhaps solitude does not stretch time. It simply returns it to us. When no one expects you to act, you stop being a function and become a being, just alive, without a task, without a goal. This is frightening, because the habitual race is also a comfort. When you're busy, you don't notice the emptiness. But in solitude, it comes and sits down at the table with you. And then you begin to hear, not the world outside, but the noise inside. Perhaps that's why it feels like time goes differently, because now you hear each drop of it. Every moment becomes tangible. You feel the shadow creeping along the wall, the light changing on the floor, the air becoming denser in the evening. You notice what used to slip away. And in this, both freedom and burden, because solitude reveals not only the essence of time, but the essence of ourselves. What we've hidden under tasks, under meetings, under conversations. All of this comes to the surface. You realize how connected we are to others, not only socially, but also chronologically. We synchronize. We adjust to the rhythm of society. And when that rhythm disappears, we seem to fall into a vacuum. And there, another time. It is no longer public. It is yours, personal. Sometimes solitude becomes a frame through which you look at the fabric of time itself. As if before, you only saw the surface, smooth, flat, shared by everyone. And now, you're peering inside, where each second has its own taste, its own temperature, its own breath. You begin to notice that morning, noon, and evening aren't just parts of the day. They each have a personality. And when you're alone, that personality reveals itself. Morning can feel heavy and silent, as if carrying the weight of the night. Or light, almost weightless, like the breeze moving through the curtains. Noon isn't just a midpoint. It can be lazy, thick, as if everything pauses and waits. And evening, it's not a close, but a dissolving. Not an end, but a turning inward. When you're alone, the usual anchors of time disappear. Meetings, messages, notifications. And suddenly you realize most of your sense of time was never about time itself, but about other people's rhythms, schedules, expectations, outer movement. Now, all that has gone quiet. only the inner remains. And it's different. Sometimes you just sit looking out the window and it feels like half an hour has passed. You check the clock. It's been only 7 minutes. But those 7 minutes were full, with the rustling trees, the passerby, a bird landing on a wire, a thought you didn't speak but felt. You were inside those minutes, not just moving past them. Other times, you're flipping through old photos, drifting through memories, and suddenly, it's night. You didn't notice the light dimming because your mind was wandering, searching, restless, and time didn't slow down. It vanished. That's the strange part. Solitude doesn't make time slow or fast. It makes it real. It strips off the coating. You begin to feel time flowing, like blood beneath your skin when you really listen. You walk through your apartment in silence, and suddenly you realize you've stopped thinking in words. Only sensations remain. The sound of the floor, the warmth of a cup in your hand, the changing light on the walls. These aren't just actions. They are time in its pure form, without numbers, without clocks. When you're alone, the day doesn't feel like a single block. It becomes a series of fragments, and each one stands on its own, with space in between, gaps where nothing happens. And it's in those gaps that the strange experience of time and solitude unfolds. Sometimes you feel the urge to fill these gaps with music, with your phone, with noise. But if you resist, if you just remain in the quiet, you suddenly notice the pause is also a moment, no less worthy than the busy ones. It's a chance to be without rushing. You might pour a glass of water. That takes a minute. Or you can be with the water. Watch it flow. Hear it fall. Feel the glass in your hand. And that minute opens wide. It becomes almost eternal. Because you are in it. Because it is not a means. It is the end. That is what solitude returns. The right to live the moment. Not as a step to something else, but as a world of its own. And it's not always easy. Sometimes, in the quiet, you feel a strange guilt, as if you're wasting time, as if you should be useful, productive, needed. And in those moments, solitude feels heavy. It compresses, because you're back to measuring, comparing, trying to sync with rhythms that aren't even present. That's when time slips away. You try to hold it, but it turns slippery, like water. Minutes disappear, hours dissolve, and you're left at the end of the day with a strange tiredness, even if you did almost nothing. But when you let go of control, everything shifts. You stop counting time and start feeling it.